and piece of legislation that exists, end quote. Project 2025 is a far-right manifesto. It is a 1,000-page bucket list of extremist policies that would uproot every government agency and disrupt the lives of every person who calls this country home. The Department of Education would be eliminated, cutting students off from civil rights protections and ending essential Title I funding for K through 12 schools. The Department of Justice would go on a murdering spree. It would rush to use the death penalty and expand its use to even more people while circumventing due process protections. Project 25 not only calls for national book bans in schools, but also creates a list of banned words for the federal government that would be deleted from, quote, every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, and piece of legislation that exists, end quote. Here are just a few of the words on the list: diversity, gender, reproductive health, and of course, conservatives want to ban the word abortion. On that note, abortion care would be inaccessible and illegal no matter where you live. Now, we could have an entire hearing on how these policies would quite literally ruin and end lives, and I didn't even touch upon proposals for housing, climate change, worker protections, and more. If enacted, Project 2025 would destroy the federal government as we know it.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I'm Reverend Susan Smith. I'm the Director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, and you are here with us to have a critical conversation about Project 2025. We all need to know it. And so we're gonna hear from people who know about this project, who know exactly what it's about, because we want you to walk away with something that you did not know. Before we get started, and we'll introduce our guests in a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Iva Carruthers. She is the General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Dr. Carruthers, please.
Thank you, Reverend Sue. Good evening to one and all. We are so delighted to welcome you to this space. We understand there are over 800 of us who are in this conversation, and for that, we are truly grateful. I welcome you on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the hardworking staff of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. We know that we are in a very pivotal moment for this nation and for the world. We are up against this authoritarianism, this Afrophobia, this violation of human rights across the board. I'm so delighted to see our colleague, Bishop Tolton, here. We have been in these conversations globally, and we are a 365-day ministry that will continue to do the work that we do. We do it through education, advocacy, and activism. And it is in those buckets that we carry, we stand up for, we will not step down or bow down to. And we do our work as a 501c3 that is nonpartisan, right? However, we're very clear about mission, vision, and commitment. So with that in mind, knowing that what is at stake is the ideal of a democracy, we just want to make sure that we are creating a space where the voices of those who are particularly motivated by an uncompromised belief in the human dignity and equality for all and democracy, that we are well informed to be able to take back the message. With that, I want to say briefly that in addition to what we're doing here tonight, next week we will be taking Project 2025 to Zimbabwe. And so I ask for traveling mercies as a group of theologians gather to look at the implications of all of this in terms of the ripple effect globally. Bishop Tolton, I know that you will represent and want to have us represent in that context. I also, though, am especially delighted to share with you new faces of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference as we move into a next phase of capacity building and to continue to do the ministry that God has called us to do. And so we have a new Chief Financial Officer, Felicia Gates. Can we show Felicia so people can put a face to Felicia? Felicia. Thank you. There she is. And then the Reverend Damian Durr, who is our Chief strategist for such a time as this, and the Chief Operating Officer. And I want to welcome Reverend Durr to this moment and give him a few moments in order to welcome all of us and to convene us for such a time as this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carruthers, and thanks so many of you who have gathered on this evening, knowing that obviously there are many spaces and places that could be occupying your time. So we are glad that you are joining us for this critical conversation. Thank Dr. Carruthers for her intentional, creative, and steadfast stewardship of the Proctor Conference for these past 21 years, and we look forward to continuing to build on that which was poured on a solid foundation, of course, by the other co-founders, Reverend Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright and Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III. So thankful for their prophetic witness and ministry personally, as well as developing ministries that took seriously Micah 6:8 and Luke chapter 4. And of course, as Dr. Carruthers said, to the board and to the amazing staff at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, having been one who was impacted by the Proctor Conference, first as an undergraduate student, then as a graduate student, and then as we moved into ministry into the world, the Proctor Conference served as a critical space for dialogue, exchange, exploration, and engaging of praxis as well as theology. And so at the times in which we live, we of course need the work that the Proctor Conference has committed itself to prior to this moment, but of course in these times. And so I look forward to the dialogue on tonight, and want to thank Reverend Susan and Reverend Marcus for all the work that went into gathering us tonight and gathering our guests tonight, who I'm sure will lead us in a very critical conversation around Project 2025. And thankful that you all have gathered out of what I think is a sense of revolutionary love, which Michelle Alexander wrote about, of course, in her article earlier this year, that revolutionary love for democracy, your revolutionary love for justice, and your revolutionary love for humanity and this planet, I think compels us to come and have this crucial conversation so that we will, of course, continue to be good stewards and agents over the world in which we have been given. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Carruthers, and look forward to our conversation on this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Carruthers and Reverend Durr and Felicia. It's so good to have a good foundation and a good working force and working family. So I'm really grateful for all of us being together. We're going to move on now. My partner, Reverend Tab, you want to say a word and we'll get started here? Anything?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a critical clergy conversation.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, for the next several weeks, we will be talking about Project 2025, what it is and what threats it poses to democracy in general and to Black people in particular. Again, as Reverend Sue said, I'm Reverend Marcus Tab. I'm a coordinator in the offices of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development with the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Thank you, Reverend Sue.
Thank you. And I'm Reverend Susan Smith, and I want to share with you, I'm so excited. We have 3 guests who are going to be doing the teaching and informing this evening. Our first guest is William Roberts, who is the Senior Vice President for Rights and Justice at American Progress, where he leads the organization's cross-cutting work on policy solutions that advance rights, justice, and equity to build a better America where all people have an equal opportunity to thrive. He is an alum of Howard University, where he earned both his bachelor and law degrees. His bio is much bigger than that, but I'm just giving you a snapshot of who he is and all of our guests. Anne Christine Dedesky, did I say it right? Anne Christine Dedesky is the founder of Gin Democracy and Stop the Coup 2025, bringing together 150 New York City and U.S. LGBTQIA+ activists to mobilize against Project 2025. She is an award-winning independent journalist and author, feminist, longtime human rights, gender equality, and HIV activist. She is also the author of 4 books. She currently does investigative stories and media advocacy about Project 2025 and the influence of U.S. Christian evangelical groups and money who are pushing the anti-gender agenda in Africa. And our final guest is Bishop Joseph Tolton, who is the founder and president of Interconnected Justice, established in 2020. Interconnected Justice is a transnational network uniting people of African descent in Africa with those in the diaspora. Bishop Tolton says that the mission of his organization is to align and harvest resources while confronting the most pressing and imminent threats to the advancement of Africans globally. So we are wonderfully glad and grateful to have you all. So each of our guests is going to give a presentation about 15 minutes each, and we're going to start with you, Brother William Roberts.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Sue. If I may borrow the nomenclature, I appreciate being here with you tonight and with all of you at the Proctor Conference to speak about this really important, critical conversation. We were talking before we came on about the way that Project 2025 has sort of gotten into the zeitgeist, into the bloodstream in the country, and it is good, frankly, that that's happening, because for too long no one knew what it was, and so it's great that over 500 of you are here tonight to learn about what this agenda is, so that you can spread the word. I'm gonna start by showing another short video, as long as I don't mess up the tech here. It's only a couple minutes long. And then go into a couple of points, and then close out and pass the microphone, as it will. This video is produced by the Center for American Progress. We just last week actually had a convening in our offices in DC, bringing together hundreds of folks in person and almost 1,000 people online. I'm told it's the biggest event we've ever had to talk about what Project 2025 is and what it means for the country. And so if I can just bear with me one moment so I can share my screen here. Right, sorry, there we go. Oh. Actually, on the fly, my computer security settings is telling me I got to do something different, so I won't do the video. I won't do the video, but if I can figure out how to make it work at the end as I'm talking, I'll do it. We opened with the words of Congresswoman Presley, who laid out some of the finer points or the unfined points of Project 2025, and our video pulls together a compilation of the words of what the folks who created Project 2025 said and what they mean it to be. So if I can't figure out how to get it to play, I'll make sure I drop it in the chat so that you all can see it. But as folks have heard, I'm sure Project 2025 is really an authoritarian playbook that is designed with one central goal, and that's to eviscerate checks and balances and consolidate power in the country, to implement what is a very unpopular, we should say, and far right agenda. And you hear people say that it is an outgrowth of some dangerous conservative ideology that's been going on for a long time in the country. And while that's true, it is also wholly different. And I look forward to diving into the ways that it is different tonight. It's a playbook that really aims to alter fundamental freedoms, subvert the rule of law, and as I said, implement something that we have not had in this country before, which is an anti-democratic authoritarian playbooks that's going to really hurt all Americans. And want to look at a couple of ways, as we have talked about tonight, or as we're aiming to talk about tonight, that this really harms our community, harms the Black community, in focusing on a couple of different policy areas. And so we'll start with the broadest broadside from Project 2025, which is what it seeks to aim in the area of civil rights. Now, if you are unlucky, as many of us have been, to read all or most of the 900 some odd pages or sift through it, you will find some things that truly shock you, but we'll make sure that I share some resources from CAP and from some others that synthesize it for you all. The civil rights section in Project 2025, they are fairly explicit on what they're trying to do, and they share some narrative language, which we have heard before, that talk about going after, quote, wokeness, which we would call equity. But they have deemed wokeness, and it's a manifesto that really calls out actually what they call affirmative discrimination, what we would call affirmative action, right? And so you see throughout the narrative and the policy framework there that they are changing language first and foremost to try to shift people's view of what America is about. And so it calls for, very specifically under the civil rights section, shifting the attention of the Department of Justice to, and it's a quote, stamping out the menace of anti-white racism. It calls for using tools in the government like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, the Departments of Defense, Education, Housing and Urban Development, Securities and Exchange Commission, all across the government as leverage points to seek to monitor not just activities at the federal government, but at the state and local government level as well, in the private sector, all in search, again, of this fight against anti-white racism, which we know does not exist. And it's important to juxtapose that frame against what we have right now in the federal government. So currently, under the Biden-Harris administration, they came in with a whole of government approach to equity, looking at across the board, top to bottom, every agency, looking at ways that racial equity impacts how the federal government interacts with us, and ways to change and alter the disparities. And so they're doing that through 2 executive orders that have created agency action plans that are all about what each agency is going to do to remediate some of these harms. Project 2025 says, let's do away with those agency action plans right away. Let's restructure the government to be able to do some of these nefarious things that we want to do. And so it would take, for instance, the Civil Rights Division that we know so well, that enforces civil rights law, and turn that on its head and make it a body to prosecute state and local governments and institutions of higher education at the state and local level, corporations, and any private employer. This is a direct quote. That does anything having to do with affirmative action or DEIA policies. It would send the Department of Justice's criminal division after the perpetrators of the fake voter fraud conspiracy on the right, which we know, as we've seen in practice nationally and also on the ground in states like Florida and Texas and elsewhere, really amounts to intimidation, voter intimidation of Black voters. And so this would put the full force of the federal government behind such actions. And it's important to note that the policies in Project 2025 are a corollary to the attacks we're seeing ongoing right now against diversity, equity, inclusion at all levels, in the courts, in the private sector. And this is all a uniquely tied together attack to cynically really reverse civil rights law, and really to reverse the bedrock laws that were put in place in this country to remediate the effects of slavery. Right? We just celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and we know all of the work, all of the fighting, all of the sacrifice that went into winning those hard-fought protections for us. Project 2025 and the agenda it represents would turn all of that on its head. And so that is why it's so nefarious and dangerous. In the space of education, there is a real target on the federal education apparatus, and this new MAGA movement that's as it's organized under Project 2025. They're looking from top to bottom, looking at what families do with kids in schools, kids in daycare. This is a plan that not just eliminates the Department of Education, not just defunds public schools. It would eliminate the Head Start program. It would effectually close preschools all around the country, and so take control away from families. And it is both, again, attached to a very long-running wish list on the right to eliminate the Department of Education, but it is again tied to this precise action plan. And so the idea would be, of course, to eliminate federal Department of Education, to siphon the billions of dollars in federal education dollars that exist at the federal level, pump them into states with full control over what happens in those schools without, by the way, the full civil rights protections of the federal government and the Department of Education. And we need not imagine what this looks like. Again, we could look at today, states like Texas and Florida, see what kind of policies are being passed there, and the harm being caused to Black students. We can see the harm being caused to LGBTQ students with book bans and the like. And so this is real and in full effect. The other point I want to raise up in the education space is that Project 2025 is really taking a hard look at trying to do away with the Biden administration's student debt relief efforts, which are uniquely successful in helping Black and brown borrowers. We know that Black and brown borrowers bear more of the burdens of student debt because the average family in our community, has less wealth to help us pay for college. I'm a living witness of student loan debt forgiveness after my public service on Capitol Hill and in other parts of the career. And Project 2025 would do away with that, would do away with taking that financial yoke off of so many in our community. And the last sort of thing I want to unearth and put on the table, of course, is a point that a lot of people are talking about and zeroing in on in the healthcare space, right? It's no surprise that currently the sort of far right mega legislative agenda seeks to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They've taken, I've lost count at how many times they've tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which we know has helped to put millions of folks in our communities on healthcare rolls to change health outcomes. We know that, in looking at the Affordable Care Act is a not just a groundswell of healthcare, but a lot of communities have used the things in the Affordable Care Act to work on things like recognizing racism as a social determinant of health. And so they want to do away, of course, with the Affordable Care Act, and that's represented in current budgets. But it also wants to do this unique thing with Medicaid, where it wants to allow states to impose work requirements on Medicaid. And Medicaid, as folks know, helps to cover medical costs for low-income folks in our communities, right? And so there are several states around the country, Idaho, Missouri, among them, South Dakota as well, that are already sort of making plans to restructure their Medicaid programs in the hopes that Project 2025 will become the law of the land. And what we know from lots of research that folks have done in this field is that when you impose a work requirement, on a program like Medicaid, it only fuels racial inequality. Given the historic discrimination, both in healthcare for our community, but also in the labor market, when it comes to the ability of folks to get access to the low wage labor market, let alone higher wages. It compounds the inherent and structural racism there, and it also compounds sort of well-worn but false narratives about the Black welfare queen and our communities being takers not makers, etc. And so also extremely dangerous, tucked into Project 2025. And then, of course, on reproductive health, we know it would combined with its sort of reanimation of a 100-year-old law, the Comstock Act, as well as some other policy changes, would effectively implement a nationwide ban on abortion and reproductive health care decisions being made between women and their doctors. And in states right now where states like mine, I live in Maryland. So in states like Maryland where laws are being passed to expand folks' rights, expand folks' access to life-saving, in many cases, reproductive health care. This would, from the federal level, put a clamp on that, right? And so not just on abortion care, but talking about access to birth control, to contraception, to IVF. And we need to look again no further than some states around the country where there are heinous examples of what's happening when people's rights are being taken away, and the lengths that they're going to have to go to get health care. And so, what I want to leave folks with, I think, is just I thought I'd pick out a couple of those examples, right, that touch on our community. There are many more, and love to be able to discuss those. But I think number one, that folks should know that Project 2025 is real. It's not just an agenda on paper. It's not just a plan from a DC think tank that happens to be on the conservative side. This is an effort designed to make ready an action plan, a go plan for an administration that is inclined to these policies. The Heritage Foundation and their 100 or so coalition groups who are behind Project 2025 are setting this up not just as a policy agenda, but also a personnel agenda. So there's a staffing part of Project 2025 where they are right now actively seeking and seeding a potential conservative administration. I'm trying to keep it C3, so I won't use names, but they're seeding a potential administration with folks who would implement this, because the last opportunity that they got to do some of this stuff, they couldn't, either because of some of the checks and balances that held in our system, or because of some of the federal employees who held firm. There is a part of Project 2025 that I did not talk about, which is essentially a purge of federal employees to replace them with acolytes, loyalists of a particular party or president. It's something that's never been done before in our history, and it is proposing to do that because they know most of this is controversial, and they need the federal government to be rowing in the same direction to implement it. And so those are just some of the samplings of things. I will happily put in the chat some of the resources from the Center for American Progress. We are doing policy papers, sort of pulling apart and lifting up some of these pieces. I will likewise link the video in the chat since I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. Apologies on that.
Thank you so much. That's a whole bunch of information, and thank you. And I neglected to say, I put it in the chat, but I neglected to say that as our presenters are presenting, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and then we will be able to come back to those questions and give you answers. So thank you very much, Mr. William Roberts, and we're going to turn it now to Anne Christine, please.
Thank you so much. And before William, I know you're going to be leaving early, so I just want to say that I hope that we'll continue being more in touch. Center for American Progress's video is very good. We've been sending and sharing a lot of materials, and they've been a real leader on this among other groups. So it's great that you're with us this evening, especially because of the legislative and legal pieces that are so essential. So just really quickly, I'm going to throw up a slideshow here, but just before I do, I wanted to say that I'm really, really happy to be here tonight, and I thank Reverend Susan for inviting me, and for the Do It community, and Bishop Joseph Tilton and I. It's ironic that he's here tonight because I got into this myself last fall around September because I started looking at the criminalization of HIV and LGBT issues in Uganda and other places. I've worked for a long time as a journalist and as a health activist. And so we were working, and I invited Bishop Tilton. We met and we worked together on presenting the United Nations with a panel to mobilize the UN community around the need to address what we call the exportation of hate from right-wing groups in the United States. And the fact that essentially what was happening was the implementation of a judicial strategy and a legislative strategy that comes from the United States. So I'm going to go over a little bit some background and step a little bit back from what William has said to give you some basics on Project 2025 and just say where I'm coming from. I represent an organization called Gen Democracy that I started last fall, but we started a campaign that is bipartisan. So yes, it is a C3, and we have we've been growing extremely quickly. So we have about 25 official partners. We have some groups that work with us also unofficially. They don't always like to be named. We have bipartisan, including we are working quite actively with the Lincoln Project that puts out a lot of our materials and content to the Never Trumpers and moderate Republicans as well, as a very broad coalition, and globally, because I think we just need to talk about the fact that this is absolutely a global plan with amazing, intensive global dimensions. So I'm going to go ahead and put my slides up here. And let me know if you can see them. Just a second. Is that showing up for you here?
I can see it. I don't see the slide
Yeah.
yet, but yeah, you got it.
Great. All right. So just to say that this our campaign is called Stop the Coup 2025. It began last fall. And as we started with really it was me reaching out because I read about Project 2025 as I was looking into what was happening with right-wing groups that are working at the UN, which includes CFAM and Family Watch International, the main groups who have been behind the exportation of anti-gay legislation in East Africa, as well as in much of Eastern Europe. And so basically we started a coalition because what I found is that many people didn't know about it. And we wanted to call it Stop Project 2025, but unfortunately nobody knew about Project 2025, so it didn't work. So it became Stop the Coup because really it is a coup. As William has said, it's for designed to really, excuse me, I'm trying to advance my slides here and having some trouble. So sorry, I was having trouble with this before. Just a moment. There we go. Okay. So just really quickly, we are a nonpartisan initiative of gender democracy, and we represent and support efforts by organizations and activists to raise awareness about the threat of Project 2025. Our goal is fundamentally to serve as a centralized hub for aggregating and amplifying news, information, and intersectional voices about right-wing Project 2025. And we essentially started with the same question that we focus on now. We want to help answer the burning question, what do we do to fight back? And what we do is we convene community. We're actively reaching out to progressive activists and groups to help sound the alarm. And we focus on sort of several things. We focus on fundamentally, and we began in the first few months by breaking down Project 2025 last fall and making it really be available and digestible into like literally 2-page documents for every chapter of the federal government, so that people can quickly read this, grasp the main points of it. And then from there, we've been working to then go into other formats because many people are not going to come online, even if you've written something simply and beautifully. So we have a very robust social media team, and we do a lot of work with groups who are working in other formats. We have partnerships with a lot of different groups, some of which you know. We started out working in our very first official launch was at the Heritage Foundation in a rally in January, and that was sponsored by the People for the American Way as well as Human Rights Campaign. And we've got a lot of different groups. Most recently, we've got groups like Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, among some of the faith actors, as well as some atheist groups who have reached out. And we're very intensively focusing right now on our strategy is to get the content into the hands of community organizers and people who speak to their communities. We're a small team right now. We have about 5 full-time people, and we have, I think at this point, we have probably about maybe 3,000 people who are receiving our newsletter. And we've been growing at about 15,000 new unique visitors a month. So quite quickly getting a lot of people who are looking at the content. We do preparedness in the sense that right now we have a toolkit for community organizers that's coming out next week, designed to help people broker the conversation. We feel that local is best, and people are experts and know how to talk to their communities. So our goal is to give them the information so that they can do that. We've also focused on town halls. We've been doing about 2 to 3 town halls a month. And again, really focusing on the fact that Project 2025 is an intersectional attack. Every community in America is impacted. And so every community also has opportunities for new alliances and resources. So really quickly, I'm going to review, William has talked about some of this, Project 2025. I first just want to step back and say what people call Project 2025 is one of 4 pillars or parts of a conservative plan. It's actually arguably, some people would say it's 877 pages, some people say it's 920. It's a very dense policy document, but that's only one piece of it. The other parts are essentially a personnel plan, which William talked about, which is to recruit and place a lot of conservative loyalists into the next government. There is an administrative training program, which involves a lot of courses online, which are actually, you can go and see what they are. And then there's the last part, which has not been made public, which is a 180-day playbook. But I just want to explain how this works, okay? This is the Heritage Foundation that got a lot of money from Leonard Leo, excuse me, the judicial activist. Some of you know who he is. He helped put 6 of our Supreme Court justices on the court. He received $1.6 billion in early 2022, and he has made that money available to now 110 of the advisory groups that are behind Project 2025. Many of them have been given very direct instructions on what they want them to do, and quite a bit of that is judicial activism and setting in place the legislative and legal kind of ground for what they hope to do with Project 2025. So I'm just going to go through some of these attacks. What it is, it's systematically dismantle the federal government, give the next Republican president, quote, new supreme powers. It's actually the entire executive branch, which essentially is an autocracy. They want to use executive orders to do this, to legally reverse many of our civil rights. At this point, they've now completed, according to Kevin Roberts, 150 executive orders have been completed and are ready to go for day one. They are hoping to use the military to clamp down on domestic dissent, meaning under the guise of potentially what they call national security issues, they can borrow from federal troops and have them support local law enforcement. This is obviously something they want to do a lot for border control. It does, as mentioned, criminalizes and erases all gender and LGBTQ identity from all government rules and regulations. So basically, when you remove someone from being mentioned in a government regulation or rule, you're removing them from any kind of protection. So it's not just, as we've talked about, or William talked about, which is reversing racial equality, attacking diversity, getting rid of DEI, getting rid of CRT, but it is also removing not only the visibility of those individuals, as well as their capacity to possibly file a claim of discrimination. So it's a two-parter. And of course, it's also reversing environmental gains. This is seeking to freeze and reverse all Biden climate policies on day one and remove them completely from the government. It would like to also replace secular education with Christian theocracy and a pro-life agenda. So it's not just, as William said, a matter of taking federal money and transferring it. It's basically doing things like, under the guise of parental rights, giving parents the ability to take the federal or the public education money and put it into paying for Christian-based education and not teaching certain subjects, not teaching sex education, sexual health, sexual reproductive health, and also not teaching Black history, civil rights history, progressive history, and other subjects. We talked about the recruitment here. The goal is to recruit and train 20,000 conservatives. Right now, they've already successfully received resumes for 11,000. That was as of the mid-June. And the main criteria for these hires are for people to be able to rewrite policy. But they also must be in agreement with the agenda of Project 2025, which is also agreement with a certain set of Christian biblical doctrines and principles, which they are tested on. It will require essentially what we would call government loyalty pledges to an extremist right-wing agenda. I think importantly, we really need to look at the global dimensions, which I think Joseph will talk about. It reverses historic U.S. defense policy to deterrence, from deterrence to offense. And this is like in every area, whether you're talking about missile defense, space defense, nuclear defense, et cetera. Incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And this is the part that I think is really critical for people to focus on. It requires all U.S. policy, as well as, of course, foreign policy, to be aligned with a pro-life agenda. And what does that really mean? I mean, here with the USAID, they want to make it essentially a pro-life agenda, a pro-life agency. It means that any agency, not just in the area of health, but any agency in any sector that wants to get U.S. aid would have to agree to not provide services to LGBTI people, to transgender people, to women who might want to get abortions. And it also, we already can see from that agenda, it might get further extended to a greater sweep of the reproductive health agenda, because it is going after birth control. It does want to ban certain fertility methods, including IVF. So it's an extremely anti-women agenda, as well as anti-diversity and anti-gay. And they want to launch their 180-day playbook on January 2025. I talk here about white Christian nationalism. I think I've got some slides that are coming up here very quickly, because people tend to forget this, and the media is not covering this very well. One of the things that we can see from having looked at who's involved in this, first of all, is maybe some of you heard this past week, Trump trying to deny his connection to Project 2025. In fact, 81% of the authors of Project 2025 and the contributors are members or former members of the Trump administration, or they were part of the transition team. We're talking 81%. He knows about this document. He was very involved in being briefed on it. But what is less talked about is their connections. This is ultimately a small group of people who know each other pretty well. Many of them are white Christian nationalists. White Christian nationalism, I have this quote here, is the most urgent threat to democracy and the witness of the church in the United States today. What we have found is that quite a number of these individuals are members of a branch called Dominionism, which is and specifically are members of the New Apostolic Reformation. I think I put a slide up on this, but essentially these are people who believe in Dominionism, and they believe that they themselves are living apostles, and that they need to carry out God's work and and implement the Bible to the point where they take control of what they call the seven mountains of life, meaning all, I think it's called, the seven mountains are government, it's the economy, it's religion, it's the Bible, etc. And when you look at Project 2025, and I know I'm going very quickly because I have not too much time here, Project 2025 is a manifestation of the seven mountains mandate. It's very effectively, and it even has a lot of the language of it in it. The goal is to take control of all aspects of American life and create a Christian state. And that is the long-term vision. And it's spelled out by different authors, although they don't always say that they want to put, the Bible above secular law. But they do want the Bible to be the basis for all US law and policy. And so I'm just going to go for a couple of things, because religious liberty is attacked in this document. And I think this is where, of course, all of you will have a huge role to play in talking about this and raising this as an issue. It obviously seeks to destroy the foundational US principle of the separation of church and state, which is described in the First Amendment. It seeks to have the US declared a Christian nation and erasing Christian national beliefs over the beliefs of others who practice other religions or none at all. It is a white supremacist document. It's actually a remarkably racist document. It's so much within the entire fabric of Project 2025 that when you really focus on that, you started really get blown away by how much it is a manifestation of this kind of fear of white replacement, or the great replacement theory that I know a lot of you are probably very familiar with. The fear that white Americans are being replaced by non-white Americans. Project 2025 seeks to introduce Christian nationalism into federal grant-making decisions to reward biblically based definitions of marriage and family. In other words, the only legitimate family is married, it's a heterosexual and with children. And so single women and others are not entitled to things like federal policy. This is where you see the attacks on things like WIC and Head Start and other things. Finally, it wants to embed that into all the activities of government. And also here you can see at the bottom, I think the Project 2025 seeks to force schools that are under federal control, DC, and public schools and Department of Defense schools and military academies to follow a Christian nationalist agenda. They call Native American children, they call children of military families, and they call Washington, D.C., they call them federal children. And they want to be able to take the public education monies for them and have them basically get a Christian education. And I'm just going to quickly go through this here, that the 1980s gave rise to this dominionism. But I think what's very important to look at here is the dominionism asserts the 10 commandments should be the foundation of American law, and that the US Constitution should enforce these biblical principles. And I think those of you who follow the news closely will have seen that recently the 10 commandments have been implemented in some public schools, and that is really a shared agenda. I just want to say here again, the Seven Mountains Mandate, Mike Johnson and Ted Cruz are believers, and you find quite a number of NAR members who are being actively recruited to Project 2025. And I just really want to mention this because people tend to look at this as red or blue, Democrats, Republicans, and what they're not understanding is that this is a radicalization of a lot of conservative Americans. We have a lot of Americans who are not white, who are religious conservatives being recruited. Project 2025, and particularly the Heritage Foundation, are making it their mission to recruit the Latino conservatives right now in swing states. They're using the radio to do this. They consider them to be the critical force. And they're recruiting them not only to do things like vote, but to join Project 2025, to become part of their government. So they're mobilizing and weaponizing these religious folks and these religious communities to be basically engaged in an agenda that is so deeply racist. It's one of the great ironies. I just want to make one other point here. These are our take-home messages. William talked about this. Project 2025 is a threat to all of our freedoms. We think that message resonates with anyone across America. Project 2025 will establish an authoritarian system, and it gives the president unprecedented powers. Fundamentally, as William said, it does destroy our system of checks and balances. Project 2025 will take away women's rights to health care, including access to abortion, some birth control, and restrict access to assisted fertility. Project 2025 will eliminate federal protections for LGBTQ people, reverse gains of racial equality, and it will erase Black lives and history. It is no longer something you can teach. If you can't teach it, you also can't really defend it. And it is ultimately, really kind of this Old South antebellum recruitment, things that we saw after Reconstruction kind of raising its extremely ugly head. I just want to put this last two slides up. How can I get involved and what can I do? This is the number one thing people ask us when they find out about Project 2025. I'm going to share this slide afterwards because I don't want to overtalk here. Just to say that our goal is to say that there's a lot that can be done. We have put up 35 toolkits on our campaign, which is www.stopthecoup25.org. And these toolkits are for in every area. So whether you are wanting to fight a book ban and don't know how, you're in a school board, someone is attacking you and you're in your church, you're on the radio, we have put these toolkits up that are very practical, that work for you to know how to fight back. And we're also going to be releasing our own, which is just on Project 2025. But we think that the most important thing you can do right now is to read the plan yourself, or your summaries on our website or CAP or what others, and then tell others. When people know how Project 2025 affects them personally, they do not support it. And that is what we're finding, even if they're Republicans, even if they're voters for Trump. When they find out how this impacts them, they're getting scared. And that is exactly why Trump is speaking out to deny this. It is working. And that's the message we have to get across. We also think it's really important to integrate the message in the outreach you do. So in your sermons or in speeches in your congregations, share materials. We think it's critical for people to be speaking out to their Congress right now, as well as to their local media. And ultimately, we think it's critical that we focus on an intersectional response. Everyone is impacted, so that means every community has allies. And we need to talk about this. The one thing that we're also focusing lastly on, and I think it's the last part here, is preparedness. We have found that even nonprofit organizations who are very much frontline are absolutely not ready for this. What we've been talking to is groups, for example, in Florida, who had to deal with what happened with Don't Say Gay and other things, and they are sounding the warning. This could happen very, very quickly. With executive orders, things could be lost very quickly. So our message is every single organization, whether you're a church or a nonprofit or a government or a community group, you need to assess how this might impact you from where you are, what you could lose, what your community could lose, what it needs, and start stockpiling some of those resources now and start talking to your allies to find out how are you going to have that on hand, whether it's in health or in other areas. Finally, I like to quote the famous Einstein quote, "In the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity." And I think that this is really critical. We have seen this in other countries. So we know to think about what fresh opportunities or new leaders may emerge now. We need to bring them forward and we need to seek them out. And we think it's critical, and this is the other piece of it, that we need to revision our democracy. We need to talk about what we want with our democracy, and we need to talk about it, and we need to vision it, and we need to build it. And that is especially the message that resonates with young people who are extremely disaffected right now. They're not in any way disaffected about what they want. They know what they want. They're not seeing it. And so our job is to talk to them and to bring forth their voices as well. And thank you so much. So finally, we represent the majority of America that does not support Project 2025. So I welcome you to the resistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Christine. I appreciate it. And people are asking, I'm going to ask this question before we go to Bishop Tolton. Will these slides be available for people? Will they be able
Yes,
to
I'm happy to
contact
make the
you?
slides available.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Great. Bishop Tolton, it's on you.
Thank you so very kindly. I want to just say to Reverend Mother Iva, to Dr. Smith, and the entire Proctor family, it's really good to be with you, and to my co-presenters, thank you for your excellent work. My task today is to really talk about the specific implications of Project 2025 for people of African descent here in the United States and also in Africa. And I want to kind of just frame my brief conversation around the idea of Christianity, colonialism, and capitalism, the racialized road to Project 2025. How did we get here? Since the mid-1400s, the most demonstrative, violent, and far-reaching impact of the dominionist impulse has been the devastation and the demonization of the personhood of people of African descent. A highly racialized notion of Christianity and economics set the table for the imperial adventure of slavery and the colonization of Africa. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued an edict to the King of Portugal, Alfonso V, stating that the king had the right and the duty to invade, search out, capture, and vanquish and subdue all Muslims, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, and make subject their kingdoms, their possessions, movable and immovable, and all of their goods, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. This papal bull laid the foundation for the doctrine of discovery, which more explicitly established that Europeans exploring the New World automatically acquired legally recognized property rights over the inhabitants without their knowledge and consent. This diabolical and twisted marriage between a bewitched theology and rank economic domination continues to greatly influence and shape the current social, political, economic, and spiritual realities of Black people globally. The most recent intentions of the imperial agenda towards people of African descent have been alarmingly articulated in what has been described today by my colleagues as the document and movement Project 2025. The document and movement are only surprising because for a moment, we wanted to believe that we were now only contending with the residue of anti-Black racism. Project 2025 is a bold and shameless reminder that in fact, we are yet in need of removing the very root of the colonial project. During the American presidential election season, politicians are often referring to America as the greatest nation on earth. The rationale, of course, is the country's economic and military might. May I suggest that there is a sinister relationship between America's economic greatness and its original sin of spiritually based racism. In fact, the foundation for America's wealth and the success of its capitalist system is grounded in slavery. Edward Baptist, an economist at Cornell University, recently made a very compelling case that slavery was, in fact, a hugely efficient system because increasingly sophisticated methods of torture exacted on African bodies drove the enslaved to even higher cotton picking capabilities, which was in turn critical to the creation of private wealth all over Europe and America. In the United States in the South, cotton was grown and sold with no labor costs, which caused profitability to be wildly distorted for generations, driving unimaginable wealth accumulation. In the northern states, financial institutions worked to fund the expansion of the Southern forced labor camps into new territories. And in Europe, the textile industry bought America's cotton and turned that cotton into clothing that was to be traded all around the world. On the backs of captured and kidnapped Africans brought to America, this economic system launched the Industrial Revolution. On this account, Far from being a discarded relic in the path to modern capitalism, the enslavement of African bodies in America made the Industrial Revolution possible in the first place. The vehicle, the master tool, the glue of American racism and economic exploitation was the distortion of the Christian faith. This relationship between economic exploitation and religious fervor has, and with new energy continues to be, a global threat undermining the well-being of people of African descent globally. Before he was an activist, Dr. King was a Christian who believed that the beloved community was the peaceable reign of Christ on the earth. The outright, obvious, and raw racism of both America's separate but equal policy and the colonialism in Africa was challenged and rebuked by a counter message of justice as the force of redemption facilitated by Calvary. Racism as a core element of the American Christian faith was disorganized by the civil rights movement, which was strategically in sync with the African freedom liberation movement in the 1960s. Senator Mitch McConnell has recently announced that he's giving up his seat as the leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. His legacy will forever be stained by his crooked political maneuvers in which he stole a Supreme Court appointment from America's first Black president. His goal was to solidify minority power, minority rule in the country by stacking the courts with political operatives who would shamelessly pursue a political agenda with overturning abortion rights as its crowning achievement. In the aftermath of the civil rights movement, importantly, new life was breathed into Confederate Christianity. Segregationist Christians found first a domestic project, and secondly, a global mission woven together by two seemingly unrelated, but actually very interconnected factors. First, the US Supreme Court's decision to give women the legal right to choose an abortion. And second, the historic shift toward economic globalization. Leading up to the Roe v. Wade decision, America's relationship with the rest of the world was rapidly changing. In 1969, America places a man on the moon, signaling new frontiers, unlimited possibilities, and global competition. In 1972, Nixon goes to China, which signaled that international markets were established, globalization was here, and the coming confrontation with China as the world's next superpower was upon us. In the 60s and 70s, African nations were liberated and free, and the liberation fighters who now had to govern were looking for ways to secure their authority and to gain wealth. And in 1973, the Roe v. Wade decision dismantled a major pillar of patriarchy and American Christian nationalism. The empowerment of women in Roe v. Wade was a watershed moment, not only for America's culture war, but it signaled a momentous shift in the future of Christianity globally. While the world was pivoting toward globalization, this court decision marked a turning point as America was now on its way from being a nation confined by Judeo-Christian social ideas to being a secular nation. The reach, impact, grip, and determinative power of religion in American politics was now on the decline, seemingly in perpetuity. American white Christian fundamentalists understood well where the country was going, and in fact, they were right. Between 2007 and 2014, the percentage of adults who describe themselves as Christians dropped by 8%, representing a net decline of 5 million. A third of older millennials now say they have no religion, they are nuns, and nearly 1 in 5 US adults who was raised in a religious faith as adults say that they abandoned that faith as adults. These behavioral shifts are all juxtaposed to the stunning growth of a very specific brand of colonized Christianity in Africa. For the last 40 years, since the signal toward globalization, which American fundamentalists heard, they have been working in Africa with a vision of creating economic possibility for American corporations that stand to gain unregulated and discounted access to Africa's resources. In the early part of his administration, Ronald Reagan was exacerbated by the liberal social witness of the United Methodist Church in America. Angered and frustrated by the churches confronting his imperial policies in Central America, challenging his racialized domestic rhetoric, which Mr. Roberts referred to, and defying his support of South Africa's apartheid. In response, the Reagan administration partnered with a few conservative pastors to create the Institute for Religion and Democracy. Understanding that the Methodist Church was global and growing in Africa, the IRD's focus was to challenge the global impact of a progressive Christian social witness and to power the fight against the supposed Marxist influence on Christianity globally. The IRD's mission was to own the theological trajectory of African Christianity by promoting moral panic and purity tests and essentially conforming African Christianity into a bastion of American conservative thinking, fully rejecting the ethics of Ubuntu and thoroughly demonizing indigenous African spirituality. Since the 1980s, many other organizations have been created to cement a corrupt spiritual relationship between America and Africa. The binding idea is anchored in a militarized concept of a male god, which has created a militarized version of masculinity obsessed with policing human sexuality and hoarding individual wealth. The strategic focus of American white Christian fundamentalism since Roe v. Wade has been twofold. Domestically, racialize the American culture wars, create economic trauma for people of color, and socially disenfranchise LGBTIQ people. Globally, the agenda has been to implement a postmodern project of spiritual colonialism to own Africa anew. Project 2025 is the culmination of a highly racialized strategy to present both in America and in Africa. Specifically, the vision and work of Project 25 is as follows tactically. In America, the goal is to create an America that wholly denounces the idea of Blackness and racial solidarity by exalting whiteness as the only social and religious aspiration. The strategy is to dismantle the American civil rights infrastructure, undermine voting rights, flood Black communities with guns, endorse the heavy policing of Black bodies, drive the campaign to erase the truth of the Black experience, destroy the concept of diversity as an American ideal, eliminate reproductive health options, and demonize the economic safety net as being fundamentally un-American. In Africa, the goal is to exploit Africa's resources and to control her wealth while undermining her democracies. The strategy is to leverage a highly colonized Christianity, which is driving death-dealing, anti-gay legislative efforts that amplify moral panic, erode human rights, destabilize social cohesion, confine civic participation, incentivize corruption, undermine HIV/AIDS prevention, and restrict economic growth. And most importantly, this imposed moral crusade becomes the ultimate existential distraction, replacing economic sovereignty as Africa's primary focus. This all happens in the context of political autocracy, economic stagnation on the continent, staggering unemployment across Africa, and an aggressive birth rate. In America, Project 2025 sets out to muzzle the voice of the moral conscience of the nation while rebuilding the walls of racial exclusion that are impediments for African Americans and people of color to realize the fullness of the American experience. In Africa, Project 2025 intends to amplify the voice of a people drowning in a colonized version of Christianity. All the while, multinational American corporations have the benefit of being regarded as people in America, with all of the implied political rights, while these very tycoons are given unfettered access to Africa's resources. Project 2025 is the modern rearticulation of the doctrine of discovery, a legal document dripping with theological directives that results in the economic, physical, and spiritual domination of people of African descent. Thank you so kindly.
Whoa. What a powerful, powerful presentation. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you. And Christine and William had to leave, but this information has been wonderful. So now we open it up for questions. I've been trying to answer some of your questions in the Q&A section. I haven't gotten to all of them, but maybe I can read some of them. Or if you have a question that you want to ask right now, you can. One of the questions we have, does the document say what will happen to churches that do not follow their version of religion? And Christine, can you answer that?
It does not. In fact, it does say somewhere, I think there's one line or something that kind of makes us, I think, a point about saying that other religions will be tolerated. But of course, it privileges Christianity. And so therefore, and it privileges, and it does require, again, so I mean, if you think about it, if you're a church group that wants to provide services to folks who are maybe LGBT or women who are seeking counseling or things around their reproductive health, or, for example, sex work. These would be areas where you would not be entitled to possibly, I mean, it depends on whether as a church you're going to get government money, but if anything to do with American federal government money, I think there's a couple of other pieces that are important that we didn't talk about, though. I just want to mention two of them to sort of build on what Joseph said, which is that this entire plan is very much advancing the idea of massive deregulation. It's not only wanting to get rid of different federal departments, including, if it could, the Department of Education, or getting rid, if it could, of the State Department, or getting rid, if it could, of USAID, but it invites privatization at a level that is unprecedented. It invites private groups, even to the point of being able to get access to the presidency and the executive branch, and essentially leap over the existing structures that now exist. It would even allow private groups like legal groups to represent the government. So what it means is essentially unelected people would be, doing representing the federal government on matters that affect the American people. And in other areas, for example, the Veterans Administration, or in others, they want to privatize. And so what you're seeing is it's not just a matter of like, we want to get rid of Obamacare, but it's about favoring health insurance. It's private health insurance. It's about basically taking all these folks who get care from the VA and putting them into privately run community clinics, where they're suddenly going to have to be put to the mercy of the private health system. So when you really read the fine print, you see what this means. It's an attack on the people who are the most vulnerable, obviously lower income. And we know that has all of its implications. The other thing I wanted to talk about that I think is very important to understand is the attack on the government. It's, this idea of like removing 50,000 people. What we found is that there is a bill that's currently stalled right now. It would be the Save the Civil Service Act. It doesn't look like it's going to go up for a vote now. And what we have right now is that the Biden administration has been able to, through the OMB, pass one new rule. And what that does is it puts a brake on this system. So one thing that happened in the last 3 months is we got a brake put on the possibility of this plan, because so much of this plan hinges on their being able to use, these systems like executive orders and move very quickly. So what this rule has done is it said that you have to have a process if you're going to try to transfer someone who's in a merit-based position, and it's going to take longer you can't just get rid of them overnight and put them into a temporary position and fire them. And I just want people to understand how this works. What happens is, what they want to be able to do is take all these people who are in high positions of government, as well as medium positions, as well as even lower positions, and they want to take them from a permanent position, put them into what they call a temporary position, which is a political appointee where they might be able to lose their job. And that technically frees that position up. And so then they want to put in their people, their Christian loyalists or their conservative loyalists, into what they call acting positions. But they want to do something that's never been done. They want to give those acting positions unprecedented authority to make decisions. And they want to do that as of day one. So what they have in this 180-day playbook, which they have not made public, but which we've learned a little bit about, is they have this plan, which is really nefarious, to be able to give authority legally for as long as it can, in the time that they want to do it. They want to be able to make it happen in 3 to 6 months, because it usually takes 3 to 4 months for Senate hearings to be held or to stop things, even when they're done illegally. They know what they want to do is illegal. They don't care. They want to go in and try it. They have 5,000 lawyers they're priming to do this. And so I want people to understand when we're saying this is not abstract, this is a planned attack done by and organized by and written about by the people who ran those departments under Trump. They know
Right.
what they're doing. And so, no, it's not January 6th. It's a very different kind of attack, but it is insidious and it's very, very structured. It also means that there's a lot of things we can do in every department. I want to just talk about one thing and then I'll give it up here, Susan. Under right now, Representative Jared Huffman and Jamie Raskin are among 2 people who in the Congress, they've organized a congressional task force to try to see what the Congress can do in these next 3 months to be able to block this and prepare the Congress. The one that is Democracy Forward is convened working groups, and any NGO, anyone can join those. They're in about 8 sectors. One of them is on the weaponizing of the government. They have created what's called a threat matrix, and groups are stepping forward to take on parts of that so that it's not a good lefty organized counter Project 2025, but is the beginnings of a grassroots intersectional mobilization. And it involves government, non-government, and other actors, especially at the community level.
What's important for everybody to understand is that Project 2025 is really already in motion. All right. What they're trying to do is just make sure that they get their guy in. And although the former president says he doesn't know anything about it, he of course is not telling the truth. He's been like their henchman I think they saw in him the person who could carry this stuff out. But it's already in play and they're very serious. They've been hiring people already, so that they can undo the government, get rid of this quote deep state and replace it with their own deep state. And so it's a very serious thing. What I'm happy about is seeing people say we have to get the word out. That is exactly why we're having this conversation, because people don't know, too many people don't know about it. And I think that the more so this is what I'm really loving. Somebody says, please allow us to get access to the transcripts of the bishop so we can share. People, how can we get this information out? And I've written that webpage 1,000 times. I'll write it 4,000 times if necessary. And what you should do is go to the sections that interest you. I learned a long time ago that when you're doing social justice work, if you talk to people and you're trying to get them to vote, if you talk to them about things that will impact them personally, then they're likely to listen to you and go ahead and vote. You hear what I'm saying? So that we're talking about if they're going to get rid of healthcare, talk to some, you talk about that. If they're going to get rid of public education and use federal funds for private schools and religious schools, you bring that up, you talk about it, and you talk about it with your family and you talk about it with your friends. You don't have to convince people. You just talk about it and people will become curious about what you're talking about. So we have a lot in front of us. Who has another question? I'm hoping I answered the question that you answered. Somebody says, where are the t-shirts, bumper stickers, and hats? We haven't done that yet. But
well, I hope you all have some. We are about to unload a bunch of swag. I think a lot of groups are starting to do that. But I do want to say that, Susan, I think just to build on that, in your own communities or congregations, you have people who are in a position to speak out. And we do feel that we need to see this, especially in some of the networking, the broadcasting. I mentioned that the Heritage Foundation is really actively doing a lot of promotion on the Spanish language radio, particularly. We really need a lot more with regard to the Spanish language audio and visual and PSAs. We do a lot on social media, but we're working on that. So I would love to, if you guys do create stuff or something, please share it with us so we can share it with other people. We're trying to bring forward as much as we can. But I think that that's really what we found is that there's sort of the faith-based communities, the conservative faith-based communities are being targeted, and the Latino communities are being targeted, particularly in the swing states. So we're doing a lot of work to try to reach them.
Absolutely. Someone asked about what would happen to Social Security. Actually, the document is pretty silent about that. The document talks about cutting and overhauling Medicaid and Medicare and wanting to shift care from Medicare to Medicare Advantage and to other private entities. but they have been very, very silent about Social Security, which makes me a little bit nervous. For
Well, I
immigration,
think that's true, but when you start to read the fine print, you can see that where they hope to do it is in the way that they might change the cap on certain things. So, I mean, they're trying to cut federal benefits in almost every agency.
and every
But I
agency,
do
right?
know that Trump himself in coming out and kind of saying that, he doesn't have anything to do with Project 25. And now we saw with the Republican platform, they say they're not going to touch Social Security. Between what they say on the campaign and what we see in Project 2025, there's quite a distance. So I say, I think people really need to look at what they say and take seriously what they say and understand what they say can be translated into practical things. Like for me, I always say, if you're a teacher, look at how it could impact on teaching or your community. But I say start locally and work locally because that really is the key for us, I think, to get the word out. Also, who in your community has a voice? Who do people listen to in your community, whether it's Latino community or immigrants? Talk to those people and get them speaking out.
Either Bishop or Anne Marie, what happens to marriage equality for the couples that have, been allowed to marry? What happens to them? Are their marriages safe? We pretty much figure out that they're not going to allow more marriages, I would think, but are the marriages that have taken place, are they safe?
I would say that we can't answer that question yet. When you remove someone from their identity from all federal rules and regulations, you are technically removing them from federal protection. We are assuming, or the people have looked at this document are assuming that means that gay marriage, adoption, and all of that are basically could be repealed and reversed and that is their goal. It's also in the immigration area, which we haven't talked about. This is an incredibly draconian attack on immigration, but it's not just an attack on illegal or undocumented, what they call immigration, right? It does call for detaining and putting into tent cities tens of thousands of immigrants, which is something we've seen only in the internment camps, in World War II here in the United States. But we saw a little bit of it with the children in cages under Trump. But it also goes after legal immigration. It wants to end for things like spousal visas and the chain of migration. So if you've married someone or you're hoping to have someone who you're married to and your papers are not in order yet, you may not be able to possibly get your immigration papers. And they do want to go, they say, even retroactively after the same-sex marriages. So we think that they're being targeted, and we should assume that if they can, they will try to remove that.
Other questions from our guests? For our guests, anyone have questions? Let me check the
Brother Iva.
Q&A.
Iva's hand is up.
Dr. Iva, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say that we should not lose sight of the point about the power of language. And as a community, it would serve us well to not give legitimacy to call this movement Christian anything. And
right.
we should be intentional about disavowing this as a Christian movement, but rather just the opposite in terms of its demonic, satanic, theology, which is undergirding it. And then the second point I would just like to say is that this was named as well and called for about 50 years ago by B.F. Skinner, in which he called for the obsolescence of democracy because of the demographic shift that was forthcoming. And he said we would move into a genetic meritocracy. And so this authoritarianism and this genetic meritocracy is increased with the ways in which the genetic and genomic technologies are converging with artificial intelligence and computer technology to further the capacity for them to do what they are doing. And so it is just so very rewarding to see this kind of conversation in collaboration in ways that perhaps allows us to have a new way forward of organizing ourselves in new kind of ally relationships.
Can I note that there's a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Amanda Tyler is the CEO. They formed after January 6th. That is a quickly large growing interfaith movement. devoting itself to fighting Project 2025 and inviting anyone in the faith networks to join them. They're very active, and they're really trying to, do as much as they can do to talk about their opposition to the weaponization of religion and the weaponization and the demonization in many ways of folks who are not white Christians. So I think just want to share that, and we've put some resources up on our campaign, but they have resources as well on their website, and they're trying to do a lot around that, as well as the issue of the separation of church and state.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're almost at our end, but there's one question. There's a lot of questions. We can't get to all of them. So we're trying to get to as many as we can. But there's one question that I just read. The person says, my greatest fear about Project 2025 is the re-enslavement of African-American descendants of chattel slavery. What can you say or do to alleviate my fears? And Bishop Tolton, can you talk to that, please?
I can certainly relate to that fear, because the depth of the manners in which this really is a rearticulation of the very documents, energy, and thinking and theology that led us to chattel slavery is very, very real and powerful.
So this is what I know. Is he frozen?
He's
Here. So this
frozen.
is so I want to say that there's nothing to. I'm just going to say, I think we've come too far to be subject to that level of physical domination, but the mental and spiritual enslavement that they are after is real. And the ways in which it's already happening in Africa and places like Uganda and Ghana and other countries is very, very, very real for us. So I think we really have to think about resisting this more from a mental, emotional, spiritual, and economic perspective. I believe that our literal bodies in that regard will be certainly saved.
I
Can
think
I
you're
also add that
absolutely right.
we have some lessons? I mean, we've seen a number of countries, Namibia being the latest, where you see decriminalization, and you're seeing governments come together and rejecting autocracy after having had that. And so we also feel it's very important to learn from the lessons, and also learn from the lessons of our own movements. I mean, learn from the lesson of the civil rights movement, learn from the lesson of the the women's rights movement, and so the reproductive health movement. So we feel both domestically and otherwise. And so what we're doing also is trying to bring forward those lessons, and we invite you to share the lessons you have that you think are applicable here, so that we can make them available to the broader communities that are reaching out to us. And we really appreciate that. We think that there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom. We have it, we know it. These are not new issues, as Joseph and others have mentioned. This is the oldest struggle, right? But there are new tactics, and we also have some new tactics we can
jump
bring
in here and
forward.
say one thing that was raised that's super important is the manner in which many African American conservative Christians are actually emulating and mocking the evangelical white Christian church, and really aspire to their kind of mega church grandiosity, TV ministries, etc. And that's super important as to, I think, the calculus of white supremacy is counting on a couple of things. One, for the LGBT community and the African American community to be at odds with each other, and also for pockets of the African American community to actually be swept up in this movement because of their feelings around abortion and perhaps LGBTQ realities.
Yeah, it's a very slick, strategically developed plan. I mean, I think they have just gone over. They've been very, very, very careful. And the Kevin Roberts, who's the head of the Heritage Foundation, got his PhD in the study of slavery in Louisiana. He spent a lot of time learning us, and he uses that in the work that he's doing now. So I think that the biggest weapon that we have against the fear is our faith, and also getting educated so nobody can just tell us any daggone thing, right? The more we learn, like, everybody wants your presentations, everybody wants your slides, and Christine, and everybody wants your presentation, Bishop Tolton. I don't know how we're going to do that, because there's a whole bunch of people that want it, but I think that's good. There should be a hunger. The fascists depend on people becoming deflated and depressed and, give up. Hopelessness is not an option. And so the way we do that, the way we fight that is get the knowledge and learn and then share, learn and share, and learn, and it'll make you ask more questions. I don't want a single person to be afraid. I want you to be indignant, and I want you to be determined to learn more and to share more, because that's why we're having these conversations. Next week, we're going to have the conversation about the difference between Christian nationalism and Christianity. And somebody said that this thing, although they call themselves Christian, has nothing to do with Christianity. And I agree, because they don't even lift up Jesus' name. Christian nationalism is a political movement. That is what it is. And they use the word Christians to give them some kind of, if you say Christian, then people might think that you're okay, but it has nothing to do with Jesus. It'll be a fascinating conversation. And I'm hoping that everybody who's here tonight will come next week and bring friends with you. And Anne Marie, who's in Venice right now, it's like 2 a.m, 3 a.m, where she is now. But thank you
Can I
so much.
Yeah, I
But
wanted
if
to say, Susan, that we have a newsletter, and that if people sign up to our newsletter, they will get the updates. We try to promote ally webinars and things as well, because there's so many groups are mobilizing right now. It is very encouraging to see this huge mobilization that's coming right now in these last couple of weeks. But we need so much more, and so we'd be happy to again share information. But one way is through our newsletter that we get out to people.
Yeah. So we'll work to, I think we have all these, the things from the chat, we'll have a copy of that, and we'll be able to see who wants what. And then if we have your permission, Bishop Tolton, to share your presentation, because everybody wants it. So, but it was both of it. I mean, everything was good. So this is about it for this evening. I have a slide. Julie, do you have a slide for me to come up? But I would again want to thank you guys. And again, I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to be empowered. You know that song, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. I need for you, we need for you to have that type of determination. It's kind of like, oh, y'all thought you were going to slip that under the door. But look at how, the Lord said, no, that ain't going to happen. And so here it is. We're being presented, and we think that it's good for you to learn and then be bold, and you are telling people to register to vote. And I need for you to understand that they're still being slick, and they're going to be purging people. I need for people to check their voter registration once a week. Don't let them play games with us. We have come too far, all of us, women, Black people, brown people, poor people, LGBTQIA people, all of us have worked too hard to let them take it away. They don't have that much power. We've got the power. We've got the power, because we've got our own energy. We have our history, we have our ancestors, and we have God. Amen. Don't get me started. Okay. So we at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference encourage people to invest in our work, because the things that we do cost money, and money doesn't grow on trees. I remember my son, when he was little, used to tell me, Mommy, go to the bank and buy some money. That doesn't work that way. We have to depend on people investing. So if you want to invest in this work to help us to continue to do this work, because we're going to continue, you can do it on our website, sdpconference.info/legacy-fund, Givelify, HTTPS, give.lead, that one that's there, and Cash App $SDPCINC. We would appreciate all investments. And when you invest, the good thing about an investment is that you get a return. And the return is that we are strengthening our community through education, activism, and advocacy. That's what we are doing. So we are asking you to think about doing that, and join us next week. Thank you so much. Reverend Durr, did you have something else you wanted to say? We're good. Reverend Ivor, you have anything else you want to say?
No, I'm good.
You
I'm
good?
good.
Okay, I'm good too. You guys, you know what? I love you for coming tonight. I'll love you even more if you come back next week, and tell somebody. Don't let these people take away everything that we have worked so hard to get. Don't let them. Anne Marie, thank you. Bishop Tolton, thank you. William Powell, in your absence, thank you, thank you, thank you. And all of you guys, let's stay on this battlefield. Let's do this thing, because we have come too far and we ain't turning back. God bless. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Just thank you so kindly for facilitating all of this.
Thank you. I'm so bad. Usually when we end webinars, I click off right away. And Dr. Ivor said, don't click off so fast. People might want to talk. So that's why I'm waiting. I'm trying to learn, Dr. Ivor, because I'll click off in a minute and be out of my business. But thank you. We have a lot of work to do in actually getting the information that you guys shared out to everybody. People really want it. I feel my soul lifted.
Amen.
I do, as more people know this stuff, because I'm furious about what they're trying to do, and my soul is lifted. So thank you so much. I'm so glad to meet you and you, Anne Marie. Well, she might be gone, but thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right,
Okay.
blessings.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Bishop.
Y'all take good care.